we'd like to call this Finance Committee meeting to order here. It's December the 6th, and we will begin with the appropriation changes that we're looking at for to hopefully carry us to the end of the year. I believe we should have a copy of that in your packet there. We had a number of different increases and decreases to kind of get us to at least be able to hopefully close out the end of the year. A couple of things that are in here that we had a letter from Mr. Gears in regards to money to help fund Sharon and Jerry, the two part-time people down there, through the end of the year. That is covered in here. And we also had a question in regards to the salt purchase this year. And in the past, we usually took the salt out of Fund 3. However, that highway funds, we haven't been collecting as much revenue in that fund to actually be able to pay for the salt for this year. So we're looking at utilizing Fund 5 to be able to get us started with our salt purchase for this year. And I believe that was discussed with them as well. The other item that was on there was recreation, which isn't on this appropriation change. And the question came up, that they're running short or running low on money, and as far as not having enough possibly to get through the end of the year. And the question came up, that about other departments, not being self-sufficient as far as their funding. The difference is the recreation is actually its own fund, similar to the water fund. It's self-sufficient and carries itself through the year with the revenue that comes in for that fund, and that's what pays the bills for the water fund. And typically, the revenue that's generated from recreation pays their expenses and their salaries throughout the year. In the past, we have subsidized them from time to time when they would possibly run short at the end of the year. However, the problem is if you transfer funds into this particular fund from the general fund, you actually have to have the cash to do it. And at this point in time, we don't have actual cash to be able to transfer or give an advance or whatever to, the recreation fund. So hopefully they'll be able to eke by through the end of the year. We're in discussions about changing that next year by doing away with the recreation as its own fund, and actually put it under the jurisdiction or the auspice of the general fund, so we won't have to deal with that next year. We'd have a little more control over the department. So that's what we're looking at potentially doing next year, so we don't run into this situation again. I don't know if you want to give a little explanation of what some of the other things we were looking at changing there on the...
Mostly what we did is looked at keys that still had balances in them, contractuals and materials and supplies that do not have outstanding purchase orders as of December 1st. Since there's only 1 month left of the year, we decreased those keys down to zero or almost zero. What that allowed us to do was move money or appropriations from those keys into payroll keys that are shorted at the end of the year, and try to actually have as many payroll keys and as many departments as possible show the actual cost of 27 payrolls for 2016. There's an extra payroll this year, and that costs the general fund about $420,000 extra, just in the general fund alone. This balances a lot of different keys out and makes it so we're short in fewer keys at the end of the year. The difference that it actually makes, we're still short cash. It just cleans up the books so they're a little easier to read and follow through the year. Some of the other keys, there's some refunds for the water department, some expenses that came up that they have to fill. There's expenses as far as earnings tax refunds, some additional things there that just need to be corrected. This is a pretty typical thing we do at the end of every year, except not as much movement in all the payroll keys. Usually we get down to December and there's a lot of keys. Some are a little over, some are a little under, and we try to balance them out by the end of the year.
So what, unless there's any other changes that we will find between now and the next council meeting, we would recommend at this point in time that these would be the recommended changes to get us through as far as for the final appropriation changes for 2016. So that's what we're recommending. However, if there are additional changes to this, we do have time between now and the end of the year to actually, and it may change again between now and the end of the year, depending upon what may come up before the last council meeting. So we're going to recommend that this is what we do at this point in time. And we can review it to see if there's any questions or changes, additional changes before we actually put it on the agenda for council meeting next Tuesday. So, and as I said, we have time to change it again because we have one more meeting before the end of the year that may entail some additional changes if needed. So that's what we have as far as in regards to appropriation changes to date, as far as those recommended changes. Any questions there before we move on?
Yeah, I had a question here. Two questions actually. So the water department, it looks like we're increasing personnel appropriations, 150,000 there. Is there something that happened or a specific reason why that has come up?
The initial appropriations, when they were created for a 26 payroll cycle, not a 27 payroll cycle. And since we're trying to, with the intention, we would pay the last payroll in January of 2017. However, the state said we should have all 27 payrolls on the books for this year, if possible. The other thing is, we did move an individual from the street fund to the water fund back, I want to say 6 months ago, 5 months ago, something like that. So it just reflects what that new payroll with a new individual with health insurance being moved over and with the extra payroll.
Did this new individuals, I guess, did their job change? Are they doing about the same thing that they were doing? I mean,
there tends to be a lot of crossover between water and streets with the individual work. I mean, water comes when there's a water main break, they dig a hole in the street, they fix that, and then the street guys essentially fix it. So there is some crossover of people, who are the ones that are actually working in that area. I mean, you can't have the guy that's in charge of painting the streets, painting for the streets or signs, be in the water fund. But there are some crossover between positions, and they do share some vehicles, et cetera.
And then, so we have enough funds in the water fund to cover that then?
Correct.
Okay. And then, like I said, I had one more question. So I noticed that, we're increasing the personnel keys for, quite a few areas. It looks like we're decreasing for a couple of areas. Do the personnel increases and decreases kind of balance out pretty much, or?
For the most part. Mixed in, this is a zero sum. So when you have to take the funds out, you have to take the water fund out, but if you just look at the general fund, the change in the total amount of appropriations is zero.
Okay.
It's just shifting some money from contractual materials and supplies to payroll. And in some areas where payroll is overfunded, it decreases that to adequate level of funding, due to savings or people leaving or for whatever reason, not costing as much, and shifting that over to the ones that are short.
Great, thank you.
All right. We'll move on then to the next item, which will be, as you know, we're in fiscal emergency right now, and there's, we are compiling a forecast or a budgetary survival plan, I guess you might say, that we need to submit to the, actually it'll be submitted to council and then also to, with eventually the state, and then there's the committee that'll be formed, the budget committee that'll be formed. And so they were working on the preliminary numbers for that, but we have a kind of recommended that we use a temporary appropriation to begin 2017 next year versus a putting forth of a full appropriation at that point in time. As we've had in the past, we tried to put a full appropriation in before the first of the year, so we knew what we were working with throughout the full term of the year. But in talking with the auditor and the state auditors, and had to kind of recommend we start off with a temporary, which gives us, it's like a 25% of the yearly budget. And usually what we would do and what we are doing this year again, or suggesting we do, pretty well take a payroll number, and the payroll number that we've used to come up with these numbers was the payroll numbers that we have compiled for the budgetary numbers that we would be submitting in our report to the state for our recovery plan. So those numbers that hopefully will be submitted to them are the numbers that are being used here as far as on the personnel costs, but it just would be 25% of the total. So it should be a realistic number. Kind of base that, looking at it, is that, there's no way we would put some budgetary personnel numbers together on a temporary appropriation and then have them be completely different than, another set of numbers that we may be submitting to the state for our recovery plan. So that's what these employee costs and that are based on those numbers. In some of the other areas, we're looking at putting a partial of some of the different contractual obligations for items that we know from year to year are going to exist, being certain leases that we have, certain contracts that we have in place right now for copiers, phones, things of that nature. Our IT people that, our service agreements with, I believe it's S&H, but we know those expenses are going to be there on an annual basis, so we have some of those listed in here as well. But it is strictly a temporary, and which will get us through the first 3 months of the year. If you want to elaborate on that, Jim, or...
There's really two packs. The long sheet that says temporary appropriations, this is what the actual attachment will look like. It's not final because there's several adjustments that are going to be happening. I just see a pound reference on one of them here. This is the actual worksheet. It looks like this. Many columns across, and you can see all the keys, match the keys on this. When this prints out, it prints out as this long document. This is not what the attachment looks like, but it shows columns. The first column for each key shows what the projected payroll for 2017 is going to be. Then we take 1/4 of that as the second column. Then one says additional pay. And additional pay are those things from this year that we will owe our employees in the first quarter of next year that we intend to pay within the next few months. And so some of the departments that are owed money now have something in that column. Then you'll see one that says PO obligations. Each number in there is for a standard purchase order that we put out the first of every year for our contractual agreements or materials and supplies that are kind of fixed in their agreements. For example, SSI, the people that do eGov, there are several keys that has to be paid. There are also radio maintenance agreements. There are agreements for our computer services. There are all types of contracts, Duke Energy, cell phones, pagers. Those are all listed on that PO obligation. These are the ones we know we have to pay every year by quarter. So those are all listed on there. Then there's a column that says 72, 73, 74. That is available for additional expenses that we want to add in for this department's going to need an extra $500 for materials and supplies to buy paper. It can be put in that column and it totals over. Where it says base, those are sort of large fixed expenses. They apply more to the funds themselves, the individual funds that are listed at the end of the document. And then the change column is just there to put in to make any changes, positive or negative, so that all the changes we make can just be listed on one row across, total up into that kind of gray 2017 column that's lightly highlighted there, the second one from the far right. That gives us an estimate or a total of all those keys. And then the one that says 2017 on the far right, that's the one that imports into the exact document. So just on the top, you can see, if we look halfway down the first page and you see law director and it says, oh yeah, it should be $46,428.75 for employee costs. Well, let's round that up because there may be some additional expenses. So, we made that 47. And a lot of these, we're adding just a few percent extra so that we do have a little bit of wiggle room, that if expenses come up, we've got just a little bit more than that in the appropriations for the temporary. So this is still kind of being worked on. We've got all the PO obligation, all of the payroll projections in here, and really what we need to do now is look at additional 72, 73, or 74s that might be needed versus just operating bare bones until the actual permanent appropriations for the years pass. This covers us until April 1st. If you don't pass permanent appropriations by April 1st, I cannot pay any bills, including payroll, past that point. I can pay any debts or POs that we encumbered before that point, but any additional purchases or any additional payroll past April 1st, I can't pay. So we need to come up with permanent appropriations. This buys us an extra 90 days past the first of the year. And that's all this is supposed to do, is just cover general expenses for that first 90 days. I gave you kind of both, but really if you want to look at that spreadsheet across, and if you have any comments on that, get back to me and get back to Joe, and we can fine tune this and hopefully meet before the next council meeting and have a more accurate one. What I presented here just covers the minimal of the minimal. It'll keep the lights on, keep our computers running, keep things from getting repossessed if we can make the payments.
Yeah, so this is for review. It's not something we're asking, yep, let's, recommend that this be approved, because it still has work to do on it. But at least you can see some of the numbers, and if you have any questions or would like to have some additions made or something retracted, we have time to do that. Two things. One, if we have another meeting prior to the council meeting next Tuesday, we can make, changes to this as well. And then, but we also have the opportunity 2 weeks later at the last council meeting of the year to actually, we have to have it approved by the first of the year. So hopefully either by next Tuesday or the following meeting, we'd be able to come to a decent temporary appropriation to get us through to April the 1st of next year. So if there's any questions on it, whatever, between now and then, give a call and we can, answer it. Hopefully make the changes if they're required. So to kind of give you an idea where what we're shooting to do to get started in 2017. So, any questions on that right now, or we probably should have the other members, council, see about getting them copies too, so they have it to review also.
Yeah, we want to leave this copy here for TA.
Yeah,
And
and then we can have him shoot at the other members.
if anybody wants the actual Excel spreadsheet for that, just email me and I'll send it to you.
We took care of that already. Discuss anything on this report. That cash flow chart. I don't know if anybody had any questions on the back of the Exhibit A, appropriate, as far as the cash flow situation. If there's any questions on that, as far as what's highlighted and what's not, what we are looking to be able to pay, depending upon the revenue.
Yep. I had a question about the C9 Trust. It looks like it's a little bit higher, like the amount that we owe, but I still feel like there's probably some bills missing. Do you know when the last time we received a bill from the Innovations for that?
Yesterday.
And
That's why it just went up. We just got some new bills for it.
And so right now it should be up to date. So 415,000, that should be.
That's what Benovation sent us.
Okay.
So they manage that fund. I did get an email saying that they're looking to do an audit of it, which hasn't happened in a few years. They do an internal audit of the C9 Trust Fund, and they create actuarial tables for projections of expenses over future years based on average lifespan, listing those number of employees or past employees that are in it, the total number of beneficiaries, et cetera. And I know at least a couple of you have seen those before. We haven't had one in the past several years. And this year they're going to do another one. So I'm not sure who's calling for that, if that's from Haran or from Benovation. But the initial establishment of that was that they would perform this every year. And, like I said, it's been several years since we've seen one.
And will you share that with us once it's complete? Will you share that with us once it's complete?
No idea. We just received notice that they're doing it. Usually, Ideally, we'd like to see it by the end of the first quarter of the following year so that we could include it in our audit. And the auditors, the state auditors, are always interested in seeing that and completing it as part of the state audit. However, it's been notoriously difficult to obtain. And usually when we get it, it's later in the year. Hopefully this year, because they're saying, early December that they're interested in it, maybe we'll actually see it in the first quarter, which would be helpful.
Thank you.
All right. Next thing we'd like to kind of go over here is we've been working on a draft for the recovery plan that needs to would be submitted. Well, first it'll come before council and administration, everybody, for discussion as far as where we're at, what we're looking at, what we intend to do. It's something that shows the revenues from back to 2014 and then projected revenues out to 2022. And the numbers kind of include just about, well, obviously they're estimates, but they include a little bit of everything as far as potential purchases, so that we're looking at the big picture. So when we get to the point of putting together a recovery plan, we know it's not, you're not going to be able to pull out of this in a year's time. So we need to have a recovery plan to say, okay, we're going to do this. This is included in it, but if we took that out of it, we may be able to get to this balancing point a little bit quicker. So there's a lot of numbers to look at, but this is like the first draft of the beginning of what we're trying to put together and to submit to council, and then we'll have meetings to discuss what we want to leave in it, what we want to take out of it, and then actually we'll need to then submit our formal plan. And then at that point in time, we pretty well have to abide by that plan, and any changes to it or additions or purchases over and above what's listed in there actually would have to be approved ultimately by the budget commission that the state will appoint, and then ultimately the state will decide, yes, you can make that change or you can't. So if you want to give a...
May I ask who put this whole thing together?
This?
Yeah.
Marcus.
Was this you?
It says at the bottom left, yes.
Because the numbers are based
So-
upon history and projected revenues, and that,
So the recovery plan, Mr. Stiff, you put together?
This is not the recovery plan.
it's not the plan. These are numbers
Okay, so-
that'll be submitted to council that
you.
will be utilized to put the recovery plan together. These are the numbers that are being provided through the auditor's office for us to put a plan together. This is just a preliminary, overview of the starting point. And this is by far not even ready to come to council as yet. So, but it's,
Okay.
but if we have questions or want to add stuff to it, we can do that before it comes to council.
Okay.
And then that's when it'll be picked apart. So, but go ahead.
This basically shows the format of what the recovery plan is going to look like. And this is the format of your working document when it's produced that you will be able to follow along. And this is what the state wants to see from the city. So what we had to do first of all in my office is put together a forecast, rough numbers of how much our revenue is going to look like between 2017 and 2022, as well as projections for expenses by key for those years, including all things that we see, as Joe said, as upcoming expenses. So in here you have vehicle purchases. You have things like standard increases as step increases in salaries. It's all in this one document. Now, 2016 is by no means the actual revenues and expenses for 2016 because we are not done yet. But it gives you sort of that ballpark. Now, once we close out 2016, that whole column will go in. As we work towards our projected revenues, you'll see a lot of these are kind of flat revenues for the birth and death records for the health department, bringing those in. We're saying $40,000 for 2017 through 2022. That may go up or down, but it's very difficult to try to make a projection as to, do we want a 1% increase for that every year? Who knows? We need to look historically at how that's doing. So we put down a lot of the revenues you'll see are flat, with the exception of the earnings tax revenue and a few other keys where we know things are going to go up. For example, our hotel tax, where they're building a new hotel. So we know that's going to go up next year and the year after, et cetera. So the first 2 pages will be an outline of projected revenue, and with a total projected city revenue at the bottom. This number will consistently change as our revenues change and our expectations do and our forecast does, because the forecast is supposed to be a fluid document. However, it's going to be relatively close to what's here and just go up and down a little bit as time goes on. Then we go into page 3, which starts the expense side. And each one of these keys, this is how we budget. This is the level of appropriations. How much appropriations do we expect to require for each key in 2017? And that is the key that's there. Now, once we finish 2016, you'll be able to see 3 years after probably January 10th or so, you'll be able to see 3 years of actual historic costs. And then you'll be able to see 5 years of projected costs, or 6 years of projected cost into the future. So that's key by key. And some of the things we did that differ from what we have now is we move recreation out of its own fund into the general fund. We move EMS fund, no longer a fund. It's now a key in the general fund. These are the things the state is recommending, so we are putting those in here. Once we get down to, and you'll see our bond payments, everything else are in here, and that continues on to page 8. On page 8, then there are totals that include breakdowns of personnel, contractual, materials and supplies, capital outlay, fixed charges, fees, debt service, and refunds, total for the entire general fund. Then at the bottom, we show how our total expenditures, and then we show how short we are, or over, revenues minus expenditures. That's at the bottom of 8. Then we show what our fund balance is at the beginning of each year, and how that fund balance, if we maintain this current cycle, if we keep doing like we're doing without any changes, how we are going to end each year. That's page 9. They wanted everything in there. Then we come up with a plan. And the plan items. What are the things, and that's page 10, what are the things we're actually doing? And we're kind of starting to put numbers in there. Some of the agreement to pay the police and fire pension fund on a payment plan. You'll see that it actually decreases some money from this year, but it then increases it next year. These are potential savings. So negative means it's increased cost. And you'll see some of the other items that we were talking about potentially putting in. After that point, so this item, this section is going to basically end up being the things that we've already done, right? The new healthcare plan, any kind of concessions or agreements with the new contracts. They wanted those separately as line items, so they're listed on this page, and the approximate cost or savings, increase or decrease, to be listed here. Then every page after that, you see potentials for changes that the city can decide to make. So we started taking recommendations of how much cost savings there would be by doing X, Y, or Z. And that's really what we're looking for at this point as we put this together. What are the suggestions that council has, or individuals? Somebody come up to me and say, hey, what if we use Paycor? What if the auditor's office gets rid of one person and has Paycor do payroll? How much can we save doing that? Well, that's an item on here. Now, we're still investigating, but I put that as a line here. No totals on it yet because we've got to look at that. Each one of those things, closing the community center, closing recreation, outsourcing building department, outsourcing the health department, each of these things is something that we need to come up with a monetary value on, whether we agree with it or not, whether we think it's actually going to happen or not. So you're going to see in here, there's a couple things where the police union, they recommended eliminating the earnings tax deduction for people who live in the city and work outside it. Well, how much will that save? If you do it, no tax credit, 25%, 50, 75. So we got those numbers from the earnings tax commissioner, and we put them in here. So you know, whether you agree with it or not, you know. You want to eliminate the retirees' health care? This is how much it's going to save, whether you agree with it or not. Then you guys can go through and look at this and say, here's what we want to keep, here's what we need to get rid of, this is where we can make cost-cutting measures. But each one of those is a line item below the total expenditures and revenues at the top. And what you have to do is come up with enough stuff below the line to make a difference and change that bottom line. It doesn't have to happen in 1 year. But this is what the document is going to look like. Now, this is still a rough form, but it gives you a ballpark idea of what we need to be thinking about. And as anybody comes up with a potential cost-saving measure, whether they be on council or an employee or a citizen, they can tell us, here's something, why don't you do this? And we can look up and see how much is actually saved by doing that or how much more it would cost us to do that. And we make it a line underneath. And so that's basically page 11 through the end of the document. And you'll see at the very end, there's ones that say title. Those are just blanks that I can put stuff in. So this gives you kind of an idea of what you're going to be working with when you have to do a recovery plan. This is the document that you're going to be using, and it is a spreadsheet, and you can put numbers in and change them around. The actual document will be something that will be approved by the Auditor of State first, then it will come to council to work with. And then any suggestions you guys have, any ordinances that need to be passed, it then goes back to the Auditor of State who double checks it, and then it goes on to the commission that approves it. That's for the final plan. So adjustments will be made by council, sent to the Auditor of State. They will recheck all the adjustments, send it to the commission approves it or not. And that is what's going to be required for us to get the permanent appropriations for this year, unless they make some kind of extension and say, we have 120 days from the time the commission seat to do this, but there's only 90 days from the start of the year for permanent appropriation. So they may make some changes there in that calendar.
So this, well, number one, do you have any questions first?
I do.
Yep, go ahead.
Do we have to have a positive annual ending cash balance at the end of 2022?
Yes.
Okay.
What they're going to look for, from my understanding, and this will be up to the commission, is that we don't have to have a positive cash balance by the end of 2017. We have to show that we are moving in a positive direction so that we do have a recovery plan, let's say within 5 years, to show that we have obtained and are maintaining a positive balance.
Okay, so I guess I'm looking at the end on page 10, just on the changes that have already been made. Obviously, we're going to be positive at the end of every year, but it's only coming off a little bit of our total debt. So by
Correct.
2022, we need to have we need to have no debt.
We have to have a beginning fund balance that is positive.
Okay,
Which-
so we don't have to eliminate completely all of the debt by 2022 is my question.
You mean the negative?
Yes.
Yes.
So we do. So right now, based on the changes that were made, we're still showing at the end of 2022, we're still going to have a negative $2,525,120. Correct? Am I reading that correctly? on page
If
10?
okay, I see where you're looking. Yeah, that is correct.
And does that need to be positive, is my question?
Yes.
Okay,
Long-term goal, whether it be increasing revenues, decreasing expenses, probably a combination of both. We need to make that positive.
okay,
And whether they want it in 6 years, which is this, or 5 years, or 3 years, is up to the commission.
okay.
There's a possibility that the commission could say, hey, you're making progress, but we can't, cut your way out of everything in 2 years' time, or 3, and maybe even 5. But there could be, if some things come on board, but they're not going to kick in until, possibly 2022, or, if revenue starts showing up in 2022, those would be things that they would take into consideration, and they wouldn't, say, okay, you're not there right this, it's not that they're going to drop the hammer down.
Right.
However, they will be pretty firm about it, that we can't just keep moving
Even
on.
though annually, we would have a cash surplus of over $1 million, let's say, if in 2022, if we just made the changes that have already taken place, or some of the changes that have already taken place. But because we've only eliminated the debt down to,
Well, I wouldn't think of it as debt.
okay,
And think of it as, we don't have enough money, it's money that we still owe from the previous year. When you say debt, you're thinking bonds, right, things like that. What we're saying is that we need a positive beginning cash balance. So if you end a year and you're $1 million in the hole, but you can afford, exactly your revenue and expenses, at the end of the year, you're still $1 million in the hole,
right,
right? So that $1 million in the hole has to be positive.
right,
Yeah. So
Okay.
if that's what you mean by debt, yes.
okay.
So, Marilyn, you have a question?
Yeah, I think you guys know where I might be going. When I read on here, elimination of the C9 trust and elimination of the retirees' health care, there are other options. I don't know where to go to get the help to find these, to get the information I need. It's real easy just to say, okay, not easy, but, you can always say, let's just eliminate it. But I don't think there's very few people who understand the whole C9 trust and the retirees' health plan. I have been to many people, I've sat at your office. I have been trying to get information since September from this administration on the C9 trust. I can't get it. I went so far last week as to ask on council floor for a public records request. I'm supposed to be representing the retirees, and I can't do it because I can't get any information from the city. And I think doing just even the thought of eliminating this for the retirees, when there should be a way to at least look at other options, which I'm not able to do, and I'm hoping that somebody on the finance committee or one of you would be able to look at some of the options, different kind of insurance plans, not being self-insured. There are other ways to go.
Yeah. Well, that is what will be discussed. This isn't saying that that's what's going to happen.
Right. I understand that.
This is just the same way, too, with eliminating the health department.
But
or
before it
eliminating-
goes there, I would,
But
if somebody could
these
look into that.
are things when you sit with the state auditors and some of the things that they kind of suggest, putting on there for discussion. All these things are on there for discussion. It's not, yep, we're cutting all this stuff out and everything's going to go away. That's not the purpose. The purpose is, for discussion, and that particular, it's just, it had to be on there.
Correct.
It was this, and you are correct that there potentially are other options that should be available, that maybe help curtail some of it versus, chucking it all. And that's the same way with, outsourcing the building department in the same way with, 911 and all these things are, they're up for discussion and options, and that's when we sit down, that's when we have to say, okay, well, here's the option for this. We can do this and save this amount but yeah, this document here is just a starting point.
Correct.
And that's why.
I understand that.
And that's why we want to get, because we may have another option, like, I don't know what it might be, but, buy lottery tickets every 2 weeks and with the winning numbers going, to the general fund, something like that, just but those are different, anything can be listed in here, and then it's up to us to really finalize it. It's going to take discussions like this really to really come to some consensus of approval, so.
I would say that if there's anyone who could look at the numbers at the end of this and say, for all these suggestions, for all of these potential expense eliminations to be considered, if there's not something on here that disgusts you or angers you to the core, there's not enough stuff on here. Everybody should see something on here that just makes them bilious with anger. But it has to be on there, because frankly, if we don't have those things on there, then nothing will be on there. You think I want to lose an employee and outsource to Paycor? No, but we're going to look at what that would save. You think anybody wants to outsource 911? No, but we need to look at those numbers, and the state's going to want to see those on here, and the commission is going to want to see what those mean. How much would it cost to eliminate a personnel and outsource something to a private contractor? Nobody wants to do those things, but they have to be on here, and they have to be considered, and they have to be considered seriously. And we need to figure out how to make this balance. All I'm going to do is provide those numbers when you come to me and you say, hey, what if we did this thing? What if we closed the health department? I don't want to see that done, but that's on here. How much do we lose? How much do we gain in savings for the 3 quarters of next year when there's nobody there, and the full time for future years? But what revenue do we lose? And what are the other expenses we have to incur to make up for that? And what is that bottom line by doing that? That's what this document does, or will do when it's done. But we need to start thinking about it now, because you don't want it to be, okay, the commission is seated, you have 120 days to make your decision, so auditor, now here's 100 suggestions. Let's start it now, so that when we get into this process, you've actually got some real numbers to start kind of chewing on to make those tough decisions.
And Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. So, I agree with Marilyn in the sense that we do need to get some other options when it comes to retirees' healthcare and C9 Trust. I do think there's maybe there could be a cap put on, the amount. There's many things that could happen that might be able to save some of this extra catastrophic costs that we have to incur just to make sure that we're covering our seniors. So, anyways, I just want to make sure that we can, if there is difficulty getting the numbers that's needed, in the time frame. I just expect that we'll be speaking up, because I think right now I don't have any faith that, let's just say like Marilyn and I were to ask that we add on here, whatever option that we pick out that might be a better option, or whatever, a couple options. I right now don't have faith that we're going to get the cooperation, your office will get the cooperation from the administration or from whoever needs to give it to allow you all to have these numbers accurately. And so, anyways, I guess I'm just saying that be forewarned that I think we'll continue to be vocal on that, because I think we do want to see some different options there, just to see what else might be out there and what could be possible. So, thank you.
Everybody's going to be on this, in this process. It's not just us 7 people on council that are going to be involved with picking and choosing and finding options on this. So, it's not just going to be
And it's not
council.
Well, we collectively, us together, we do not have the tools to be able to accurately see, predict savings for different types of changes to the C9 Trust or the retirees healthcare. We're not really able to. I don't think we're able to calculate that. I think we'll need, I guess, Haran or whoever. I forgot the group. What the Open Innovation? We'll need Innovation's help. There's going to be assistance that we'll need to do that. So, of course, we'll all make the decision. Together make the decisions on how we get to that end number. But I'm just saying that. I do agree with Marilyn that she's been working since September to try to get some information, and it's been hard for her to get some of that. So I just hope that we can get that information in time to make it onto this plan, I guess is what I'm saying.
You're going to have a commission that you can go to. And what their role and everything else, that's discussion with the state auditor as to what their powers are, et cetera. But if anybody has an idea, we just went for the big obvious things here. If anybody has an idea of specifically within a department or within a plan, let's, instead of getting rid of this, let's change the way we do this, or let's alter this revenue source, or decrease this expense instead of eliminating it. That's what you guys are going to be doing. And that's where this is going to be used when you come back and you say, well, what if we do this? How much will this be? That's what this tool's for. And by no means this is even close to the end. But this should get your creative juices flowing and coming up with different suggestions, and then we can start trying to pull that information together. But that's going to be council doing it.
Okay, thank you.
We'll help you.
So it's a starting point. There will be some work involved still, and I know, and we somehow will come to some solution with it, or come up with some ideas on not only that but the other items too, because the other ones are going to take as much research in that and a couple of the other items too as that will. So, okay, so just to kind of give it some thought, and also too, if you get some ideas or requests or needs to say, hey, we're going to need this kind of help to get to this point, then I think we'll have to address those things either with the commission or the state auditors or whatever. Today we can't make these decisions without XYZ amount of information, and we'll hopefully can get to the bottom of it. So, but it's a lot of numbers.
Thank you.
So,
A lot of time, a lot of effort went into making this over the past 2 months, just to get to this point. There's still a lot that has to go into it, mostly the year-end figures for 2016, and looking at any projected changes. So that's what that I keep saying 120 days, is it right? Something like that. 110 days, 120?
all right. No, really, the addresses, did you give me that?
No, I don't know anything about that.
I just, this letter from Chief Wallace regards to, you want to give us a little explanation on that? Again, I'll read the letter. It said, Mr. Stith and Finance Committee, I'm writing this email to advise you that the Norwood Fire Department is currently conducting the NFPA required inspections of firefighter PPE bunker gear. With the exception of the last 10 or so persons hired, our bunker gear is approaching 8 years old. Yesterday, I was informed by our PPE officer. So far, we had one pair of bunker gear pants fail this inspection and needs to be replaced immediately. We do have some extra bunker gear in storage, but the available sizes are hit and miss, and we currently do not have the size needed available. I'm in the process of gathering pricing information and will, within the next 2 weeks, be requesting a PO to order necessary replacement gear. Respectfully submitted, Ron Wallace, Fire Chief. So did you want to elaborate or?
It's pretty explanatory in there. It's, we're required annually to do these inspections and meet NFPA recommendations. And we kind of figured that some of the older gear may have some problem passing. We have submitted for a grant, but there's no guarantees that we're going to get that grant. And so I guess I didn't want you guys to be surprised in a couple of weeks when that goes forward, with a PO asking for quite a bit of money.
Yes, one question. I mean, you found one pair, but I mean, how many pairs are you talking or thinking?
The PBE officer advised me that there could be 10 to 15 that he's guesstimating that may need to be replaced. But we just started this yesterday, the inspections yesterday. So
Okay.
it's going to take a little bit of time to get through all of it.
Being that we're so close to the end of this year, changing appropriations the end of this year is going to be tough. We were talking about temporary appropriations for the beginning of next year. Is this something, if council were to approve that, that could be done on that first quarter, like January 1st next year, put into that temporary appropriations?
I think it would work. I'll get, like I said, in a couple of weeks, I'll get a better number as to how many failed or how many have issues, and then get back with you on that. But even if we order them today, we're still talking a couple months turnaround time to get them to us. So I'll get back with you on it as soon as I get us some solid numbers. I still want you to be surprised by it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. We also had a claim submitted to finance in regards to looking for reimbursement for some clothes that was in a washing machine. Let's see, we had, I don't know whether everybody has a copy, but we had their clothes in the washing machine. And then there was a slug of very dirty water was passing through Norwood's water source outside. The white clothes ended up brown and spoiled. Even washing them a couple times with bleach, still had X amount of pieces that were non-salvageable. They had submitted, a claim in regards to cover the damages there. From what I understand from talking, it may have been when they flush their fire hydrants or when you backwash them or whatever it is, that sometimes that can, I don't know, that's what maybe have gone on up there, but I'm not sure. So I need to find out a little more about it. But my recommendation on this right now would be to submit the claim to the law department for review to see what, what liability, if any, we would have on this claim here. So that, I don't know if anybody else has any suggestions, but I think before we overstep our bounds on something, I think that we ought to have them take a look at it. So
That's a good idea.
all right, so we'll submit that.
Could be, we have to go back to Cincinnati because we do get our water from Cincinnati, and maybe it's their problem.
Yeah. Maybe it was still there from the flood. So, okay, is there anything else we should go over?
That's it.
All right. That was really all I had at this point. Got some more work to do on some of these documents, and if you have any questions on them or have any suggestions for them, we can add those on, and then hopefully, if not Tuesday, we can have something more representative to be close to these, to at least get a final pretty well together for the end of the year. And as mentioned earlier, we do have the opportunity to change that at the last meeting, as well. And Also, too, if we had to do something with, the gear, we still have the last meeting at the end of the year to work on that, so. All right.
So, Mr. Sinker,
Yep.
so at the council meeting on Tuesday, what will the whole council be asked to approve? Is there anything, or will we be waiting until?
Well, we may have another finance meeting prior to the council meeting, just in case there's any more changes. The only thing that we'd be looking at approving at that meeting would be the final appropriation changes for 2016.
Okay.
Yeah. So, the other items, we're not really ready yet, I don't believe. There's a remote possibility on the temporary, there may be a possibility of having something by next Tuesday to review, but it would be pretty close to this document here, but we may not feel comfortable voting all three readings at that meeting, so on something, even if we do come up with something and everybody gets it, we can maybe look at it, have time, maybe have one reading, have time to review it, and the other two at the last meeting, something like that. But at this point, the only thing that we will definitely have on for a vote would be the final for 2016. So, yeah. So, any questions? All right, then I would say this meeting, finance meeting is over for now, and we'll hopefully get together again next Tuesday. Thank you.